So this is definitely a big difference in our religious conceptions. At the moment.
Well, my thesis on your experience is that you are interacting with your own creation.
Part of me actually agrees with your analysis of my God experiences. We almost killed our relationship through a bad habit.
What was that? No, remind me.
Hello, my friend.
Good day.
Good day.
What's up?
What's up? How are you doing?
Doing well. It's a new experience to sit a full table away from you while we're talking. But it's fun. I'm excited for what's going to happen. It'll be normal or if the format will influence in a significant way.
Yeah, we'll see.
Yeah,
we've tried this before.
True, but did we try it in person?
No, I don't think so. No. Yeah, we made like 3 episodes on a YouTube channel. That was actually where I came up with the name Thinking Together.
True.
So I think that one is also still called Thinking Together.
Might be. I think you initially just called it David and Filip or something.
Yeah, and then I changed it.
Okay.
Yeah, and I also made a Facebook page for that, which I still get updates from sometimes.
You rarely do things halfway.
True.
Yeah.
Yeah. So anyways, let me give a short introduction.
Sure.
So Filip and we met at Bible school. We both grew up Christian and we went to the same Bible school. Did we close the window?
No.
Do you want to close it?
Yes.
Okay.
Just keep on your introduction.
Yeah. So we went to the same Bible school. And after that, we both went through our own variant of a faith crisis. And so we thought that today we'd cover that topic, crisis of faith, because both of us ended up in different
struggles.
Yeah, different sorts of struggles and different conclusions coming out of it.
Yeah.
So we thought that could be interesting to explore. So maybe do you want to give a short introduction to yourself, your background, and then dive into the faith crisis?
Sure. Grew up Christian. Christian to the extent that we actually had Bible and prayer at bed every night. We prayed in the mornings for the day and got some input. And we went when I was 7. We went on mission trips with YWAM. Spent 4 months in the Philippines as part of a missions base there. So growing up, I always considered myself Christian. Had something more doctrine, more understanding what Christianity was than most people my age in general. Are engaging in apologetic talks in my elementary school, or at least 5th, 6th grade. But it wasn't until more 9th, 2008, when I was 14, where I was church is kind of boring. The sermons are good, but I don't like the whole worship thing. And it's kind of, I don't know, didn't make a lot of sense to me. And I was I think I can spend my time better just being alone or, I'm on the internet or whatever. But that was when things shifted for me that summer. I went to yet another conference my parents semi-guilted me into going to, and had a different impression of the people there. It's these guys don't just talk about God, they really expect him to show up. And it's really not that hadn't been the case before. I think it was more about me maturing to where it could really stand out to me. And there I encountered God powerfully in a way that I hadn't before, where it just really in a moment or in an evening shifted my perception from God being this entity, this, judge that kind of sits over there and, sometimes checks in, and he like looks over everything, to God that's here, that's like really close and committed and cares immeasurably, not just about the state of the world and like, but like intimately cares about me as an individual and everyone as individuals. And yeah, so my teens from then on, got involved in youth ministry, had a bunch of condemnation because I knew I wasn't measuring up to what made sense. And I read the Bible, like, okay, if I actually believed all this stuff, my life would look very, very different. Why the heck would I fear what people would do when I know? And I thought I knew, and I did know, but like, it's interesting, like beliefs and I don't know, awareness or conscious. Yeah. So I was probably a more active Christian than most Christians, but I was just like, well, I'm not at the standard that I ought to be. So there was a constant mismatch. I was kind of set free from it in like 2013 when I heard a preach on Zechariah 3, basically like thoroughly beat into me an aspect of the gospel I hadn't, I don't know, not fully realized yet, that like God doesn't just blame us when we're doing bad. He cares enough to really choose us anyway.
What does Zechariah 3 say?
Zechariah 3, it shows a picture of basically like a courtroom where the high priest Joshua at the time is like standing there dressed in filthy clothes, and the adversary, the accuser, Satan, is like ready to just, oh, here's everything done. He's done all this bad stuff. But before he even gets to open his mouth, God, the judge, is just like, no, shut up. This is someone I've saved from the fire. And yeah, then it says that he was dressed in filthy clothes, which is a clear, consistent image of he was sinful. And so despite it being correct that he had sinned, I imagine, oh, God is like, yeah, you have kind of, but it's okay. I'll, you'll get it again. Yeah, you'll get it next time. We'll come right back to that. But so even though it was correct to accuse, God still didn't accuse. Like his truth of saving and cleansing was of a higher, was more, significant. So, so Zechariah is then dressed in clean clothes and gets given a new turban. And it's like this idea that God effects his change in us rather than us striving for it. And it was no more than half a year later where I discovered that grace and mercy weren't the same thing. Grew up in Norway, and both in Norwegian, Swedish, German, maybe in Dutch as well. We just have nåde, gnade. What is it in?
Yeah, genade.
Genade, yeah. Which kind of has swallowed up both. And I had no idea. Like my conception was that genade was God's ultimate free forgiveness. He was always ready to like accept us back in again. Once we came and asked, he like cleansed us completely. We have fresh start. We can, this time you'll do it, come on, slugger, this time you'll manage next time. But then I discovered in reading Paul's letters in the Bible that, whoa, God actually gives us the energy, gives us the power to transcend our mere ability. That the stuff we have strived and fought so hard to make happen, he actually accomplishes in us in a mystical way that I haven't quite, seen the mechanics of. But that was like, whoa, these are actually great news. Because before, when I had been evangelizing, I was like, it's kind of heavy being Christian. It's kind of like I know it's true. I had that conviction, but I was still just, do I really want this for people? Like that was a I could cognitively like, okay, yes, but then emotionally that was hard to convince myself of. But realizing, no, there's hope for everyone. You don't have to be a certain caliber of person for this to be good news for you. Yeah. I guess we'll get into like my doubtfulness approach later.
Sure. Oh, yeah. Okay.
Yeah, just finish off. So yeah, I did that first year of Bible school in Norway, then 3 years in Reading, met David the second year. Talked a bunch. We
Coffee machine.
coffee machines enjoying time. Yeah. Yeah, we talked a bunch, and I kind of, I don't know, saw you as, even though you're 2 years younger, I'd like, well, I'd already done a year of Bible school before. I've been out and about a little bit more. Okay, I can sort of fathom and provide good, broad, good boundaries for you to explore those questions. That's kind of my, I can handle all the.
You saw me as a student, a disciple.
No, I saw you as someone who didn't really have a place to fully release themselves so far, and that I could kind of help be that until you really found your footing, which you did during second year. Like half year in, you had your, whatever we want to call it. We're like, oh, now he's has a completely different approach to life, where there's no scaffolding necessary at all.
Interesting. Yeah, I had an experience. I don't remember quite how it came about initially,
Right.
But basically, what happened? Well, one of the things at Bible school is we call it manifesting. We just talk about it shortly, but which is that when the Holy Spirit fills you with a certain kind of energy that can manifest bodily.
Yeah.
And that means you start to, like, for example, when you're laughing, you can be going like this just because you're laughing so hard. And so manifesting is kind of like that, but more extreme. And it's sort of a practice. And firstly, when people come into Bible school and they see that, and you don't really see that in many places, there's always a group of people that's quite skeptical of it.
Yeah.
And there's another group of like extreme extroverts that are immediately really into it. And I was probably more in the skeptical
right.
You as well.
Yeah.
But in second year, I had an encounter, we would think about, where that just all of a sudden it clicked for me, and for like 3 months, 2 or 3 months long, every day, from the moment I woke up until the moment I went to sleep, I was just experiencing that bodily manifestation of the spiritual experience, and that was very interesting socially and psychologically.
Yeah. Well, I remember I was skeptical of that as well. I'm like,
sure, plenty of people were.
Yeah. But it's like how, because I always had that lens, I guess, can kind of do the doubt thing now. I've always been very concerned with what is objectively the truth. And there are always factors contributing to how you perceive things and how you judge things as true or not. So it always, because most people, they have their views and they're sort of self-evident a lot of the time, and they're confident about it because they're confident about it, and they don't. You need to bring really hefty counter evidence for them to even like start to shift. They need to really be defeated thoroughly in their views in order to. So I was like, okay, I'm not going to be that. I'm going to be the person who proactively seeks out the weakness in my own argument, seeks out the flaws in my own worldview to be sure that what I believe is true actually probably is true. So in my own experience with manifestations, I had seasons of like, oh, I'm kind of setting myself up for having these experiences. I'm kind of leaning into them a little bit psychologically, physiologically, like I'm God, is there something and if there's a slight twitch, then you can kind of, I've noticed that as well now. Like I can kind of trigger it.
Yeah.
And especially when there's like a big social situation, there's acceptance associated with it. Like, even though I don't think a lot of people lie when they're manifesting, like they're actively acting something out in order to fit in. I think it's way more subtle, psychological than that. Yeah.
Well, I remember a discussion we had about this was that you were wondering how much of this is God and how much of this is me.
Yeah.
And you wanted 100% of it to be God.
Yeah.
Initially, I believe.
Yeah.
And I think during that season, my perspective on it became that, well, it's a co-creation. Probably didn't use that exact term,
Sure.
but it's like, yeah, of course, you do something, then God breathes in it, and that's how the experience unfolds. To me, that wasn't an objection to the validity of the experience, but for you, it's always been this. You have to be like certain.
Yeah, well, the typical thing I encounter when I talk to people of other faiths, like, well, how do you know that Islam is true? How do you know Mormonism is true? Those are just the examples of people I have talked to in depth about these things. And so I've heard them say, well, I just know deep in my heart. I know that it is.
Yeah.
And I'm like, okay, if both of you say that and Christians say that, that isn't valid grounds to have certainty on, because you guys have incompatible views. So it cannot. So you have to have other factors to really build your beliefs on. It's got to have any. If I want to have confidence in my confidence, I need to have something else than subjectivity. Yeah. So that means, okay, I have the experience of craziness that it appears supernatural to me, but I gotta know. And that's kind of
I had a more
annoying
fun time.
Yeah, it's an annoying journey to question everything, but the way I'm wired, I couldn't do it differently. I couldn't have peace. I couldn't just sign it off. Okay, it's probably fine. I'm like, no, I can't have peace unless I know. I mean, not in absolutely everything, but when it comes to the core thing of like, okay, who am I gonna consign my life to? Be it God or a spouse, like, or I guess the major church community, like I do. Yeah.
You want to be on solid ground.
Yeah.
Rationally.
I can't do it otherwise.
Yeah. Well, I thought it was interesting that you mentioned this period as the stage at which you saw me kind of get more of my own footing in the Bible school experience.
Yeah. Well, because you had, I don't want to like draw too close of parallels, but it was like some incel-y-ish, poor me, everyone else is and like we could bond a bit over like, well, yeah, obviously there are cliques and there is popularity stuff going, like that's real, but like you kept kind of like spinning around there until this, and well, incidentally you suddenly became part of the in crowd. If that was because you suddenly had more of a spotlight on you, so more people recognized you, or you just took yourself less seriously, that's the eternal question of people who have those changes. But anyway, so that's why I pulled that up as a
So do you want to continue the story from there? You were describing
Sure. I don't know if there's too much more to mention from Reading in terms of us. I mean, we gradually built relationship, and as we left Reading,
we almost killed our relationship through a bad habit.
What was that? No, remind me.
The slapping.
Oh gosh, that didn't almost kill a relationship.
No. That's too extremely put. But still, I liked the way that. So what we used to do was when we saw each other at school, then we would slap each other in the face.
Yeah,
and that's something to do.
Just lightly. It's
no,
like there was some substance. It wasn't as hard as we could because it sucks, but it's jarring.
Yeah, yeah. And I think some of our reasoning behind that was that we enjoyed the physical contact, and it was sort of a proto version of wrestling, and
maybe, or it was so out of norm, and we enjoyed being different. And there's something about like so radically practicing stoicism.
Right. Yeah. Well, I wasn't stoic about it. I was very enthusiastic.
Yeah.
Not in a masochistic, or what is it?
Sadist.
Yeah. But what you told me later was that at a certain point you started to feel like you were being negatively conditioned to encountering me.
Sure.
Because every encounter with me was associated with a slap, a painful physical experience. I thought it was funny because at a certain point, you said, "Okay, let's not do this anymore."
I don't.
Yeah. So, anyways, that was the final thing that I thought necessary to add to the Bethel story.
Very necessary. Yeah.
So
shortly after, we went back to our respective countries. You were one of the people who intentionally stayed in contact. So it's like you and maybe 3 others that I have any contact with at all, semi-consistently. And you very quickly, quite immediately, had I don't know what you call it, atheistic flirtations.
Yep.
Which quickly was more than that. It was initially quite apologetics, that kind of well, God is eternal and he's infinite and he has perfect foreknowledge. How could he ever do? How could he ever act? How could he ever interact? If he is, then he perfectly knows what will come. He'll just, prepare responses in advance. And so he can't actually interact. He can only sort of pre-program stuff to happen. So he needs to be just a stable rock, and we're one of the infinitely many imaginations.
Yes, although I would put it a bit differently. It is an interesting line of thought, I still think. It's not so much the foreknowledge, it's also just the completeness of God.
Mm-hmm.
So he has everything contained within himself already. That's sort of the idea. He's a closed system in that sense. So that to me meant that he couldn't, since he didn't lack anything, he couldn't be motivated to do anything.
Right.
There was no lack. There was already completeness. So he couldn't be motivated to do anything. Therefore, he didn't do anything. So therefore, he didn't create our world. Then I thought, then what is our world? And I thought, well, then our world must, if God is already completeness, then our world must be part of that. So you can conceptualize of our world as just one of the thoughts of God, because my conscious experience has to be present in the completeness that is God. That's one of it's sort of a multiverse theory.
Yeah.
So, yeah. But then I learned later sort of a rebuttal to that from because apparently some Jewish rabbi in 1400 or something thought about this. And he came up with the idea that, well, what does God lack? He lacks limitation. So he creates a world that's entirely, that's all limitation. Like you can conceptualize of the world as all limitation. Like everything is an identity that has its own boundaries. And you can you can reduce everything to more parts or to higher wholes. And so everything is a big identification process, which is the exact opposite of God, who would just be the complete, unified being. So
anyways. So you kind of went full into atheism, classical, straight up. Yeah. And when you came to visit me after the first half year, you were basically done. Not done but fully on that side. Yeah.
It was April when I first called myself an atheist, and we came back in September. So I think of it as 9 months. I don't know if I calculate correctly.
Right.
Or we didn't come back in September. We came back in May.
Yeah, I came back in May.
Yeah.
And came to visit me in January. Yeah, my logic was like, well, you know, it's sad to see you leave God, leave Christianity, but I know what's not going to work is to just punish you by, you know, removing connection, etc. And I, still did and still do think that there's a redemption arc. There's a, you know, coming back of sorts. That isn't like, we've talked about this, you know, is that the only reason you stay in touch? Like, no, it's not. But yeah, I do still hold out for that. And yeah, in the meantime, there's been lots of change on your end, some change on mine. And we have been able to be a great help to one another when, things are crazy chaotic and hard to filter through, and just having another person with a history of creating common language, common understanding, a foundation of sorts from which you can explore our individual worlds and, you know, greater ideas, been extremely helpful, especially when things are weird, hard to sift through.
Yeah, that's one thing we do really well.
Yeah.
This type of almost analytical discussion, sifting through ideas, even when they're sort of out there.
Yeah.
Like my whole try truth model phase.
Yeah.
But yeah, it's interesting. In what way would you say that's maybe especially on the religious front? Has there been anything in our discussions that has helped you there?
Well, kind of implicitly, like the fact that I know you exist, it sharpens my inner atheist as well, to not just accept easy answers. I know that if my faith is true, it's, you know, the correct theoretical interpretation of reality, or correctest, you know, as far as all the other models that I possess. It can't be, like, I might be able to trick myself, but there's the added hurdle of like, well, what would David think about this? And yeah, my whole life, I've sort of collected perspectives. Been, okay, you see the world in this way. Explain how exactly, and help me like see it, so that I can sort of integrate it as, okay, and see how it works, where its weaknesses, its strengths. And then whenever new situations pop up, I kind of reconsider all these different perspectives. And, you know, whichever perspective best accounts for the available evidence and predicts, you know, gives the best path forward, that's probably the best one, the truest one. And I've consistently found that to be Christianity, but not because that's the only one I've known. Because all these other ones have also been developed. If it was during my 2 years of semi-regularly meeting with Mormons, it was, you know, doubts regarding atheism, or eventually regarding agnosticism, and sort of like, well, is the truth even knowable? Like you eventually transitioned into, positivism and phenomenology, sort of, in my ultimate pursuit of knowing what the truth of the matter is, it has felt incumbent, necessary to, entertain all these different perspectives, and ultimately, you know, figure out if the faith I have, is it true? And I've often found that the Christianity I did believe in didn't hold water. And I guess that kind of naturally segues into my own faith struggle. As I moved back to Alta from Reading, I took over as youth pastor. Started out with great gusto, really felt God had called me here. I had like a vision, had a semi-plan, like, okay, this is what I want to build, and etc. Quickly encountered my old demons, so to speak, my vices and like my immaturities, because I left a community, I left a consistent everyday life to suddenly be back in old circles, communities, friends, and not really having anyone to, really, I don't know, carry that same perspective. I had to carry it all myself. And I remember there were lots of people who, or at least a few, who actively encouraged me, like, hey, go together with someone when you head home, bring someone else along. Like, that's important. And I tried, and I prayed that would happen, and felt God gave me a promise that He would. And the one that I was most counting on, well, first the two I thought I would have community with, they left that summer. The ones who'd been living in Alta. Third person who I'd known in Reading, who was moving back to Norway, she ended up doing something else. Even though she told me later, she was like 90% sure she would join. Not sure what happened there. Then I met a guy who had just moved to Alta, as a brand new acquaintance to me. And I felt the real like, oh, this is the guy that I'm gonna be close with. But because of my own weakness, sort of giving into temptations and like, oh, I want to avoid doing the hard thing. I just kind of want to, I succumb to my own weakness. That just didn't happen, and I blame myself for it. But then I was like, hey, well, if God called me and He knows what I need, He knows how weak I am, He knows to provide me the things I need, why isn't it happening? What's the holdup? And so eventually I like went into my own deconstruction process of like, okay, well, I learned all this stuff through my life and through teachers, etc. But I'm not seeing the fruit that the Bible describes should accompany a Christian life. So my deconstruction wasn't so much, okay, let's tear everything away and like start ground up by my own logic, my own sense of things. I'm like, no, either the Bible is true and trustworthy and effective, or what else is there to Christianity? Like what kind, I'll just make up my own thing, and that, like, what is that? So I was like, okay, what does the Bible actually say? Not just what have my teachers said, what have been my sense. If I look really critically at this thing, okay, pray and you shall receive. That's a very simple verse, or ask and you shall receive, I guess. Well, the Bible also says if you pray with wrong intentions, James 4, you shouldn't expect to receive anything. James 1, if you pray in doubt, you don't expect to receive anything from God. Jesus says to his disciples, if you pray for anything in my name, you'll receive it. And so there are caveats. Sometimes the Bible says things simply and just like I might say, oh, I'll always take care of you. I'll always be there for you when you need me. But like, okay, you're out of toilet paper in Rotterdam. I'm in Norway. Like, no, I'm not going to be there for you. Some simple things. Okay, what's the nitty gritty? So I dug a lot in the Bible, and I dug in different perspectives. Like, okay, Calvinism, Arminianism, like, okay, is it incumbent on me to set up my life to live in such a way that God can bless me? Or is my even trying to live well, dismissing me, disqualifying me from God blessing me because I'll get proud and, I'll think I sort of brought this about. That was a major struggle that occurred for a number of years. Ultimately, I saw that Christianity wasn't something you just kind of added casually to your life. Particularly in Luke 14, those like significant verses where Jesus is like, if you don't love me more than father, mother, sister, brother, kid, even your own life, you cannot be my disciple. If you don't daily pick up the cross to follow me, you're not worthy of me. And it's like this idea that he allows us to live our lives however we want. He's gracious and merciful in the sense of like, okay, he won't force himself in, but to the extent that we hold back certain parts of our lives, he'll let us manage those parts. But if we want to surrender and give even those, if we want to entrust him with even every single part of our lives, risking, everything that goes along with, do I trust that God, this promise that I'll never go hungry, I'll have clothes to wear, Matthew 6, will it even, it's scary. It's tempting to take back control, and he lets us have control of the areas we'd like. But he is trustworthy. We give him everything. But I kept on encountering myself as weak and cowardly and seeking comfort, not wanting to
give everything.
Yeah. Or like I had conditions and I had stipulations that like didn't fully, and I have a more nuanced view that like, yeah, he's inviting us into partnership and friendship. There's like, it's not this robotic do everything but in the sense that he is Lord. And he is inviting us to make him Lord of our lives at the expense of ourselves calling all the shots. There is a dialogue there about a bunch of stuff. He doesn't just give us orders and then we run with it. Like he wants closeness. But yeah, it's ultimately when all the chips are down, like who are you gonna?
Yeah.
Who's gonna lead? Who are you gonna trust?
In that season in Alta.
Yeah.
So you said that God had promised you that there would be someone there for you to do fellowship with.
Yeah.
Did you end up having a person like that?
Well, my interpretation ended up that, okay, this guy that I met was going to be that. But of the several chances I had to really buy into that friendship and really so into, I kept letting those opportunities go and in favor of just, licking my own wounds, feeling sorry for myself, escaping into video games or YouTube or whatever. So I feel like I sabotaged that. But then, there was that thought of like, well, didn't God know that was going to happen? And yeah, let's not talk too much about like Calvinism or Arminianism because that's, a whole, but ultimately I reached a point, after a year, I was thoroughly disillusioned of like, what even works? Am I even saved? Like, am I even? And I was like, okay, well, I have prayed for years that God would break down all my confidence I put in myself, my own ability to like do what's right. That I would truly put all my trust and faith in him. So I was like, okay, that kind of makes sense with this. I'd also read stories like biographies and God's generals and the like, where they quickly just zoom past, a sentence or a paragraph. It's like, well, then there were 4 years of, desert season. So I was like, okay, retroactively, this might make more sense. But yeah, after 1 year, I was thoroughly disillusioned. Then it just kept increasing over year 2, year 3. And at the end of year 3, I just, I had a conversation with my parents And after this one, I had many conversations with them, but after this one, I felt the sense of calling that I was supposed to stay here. That was like, that lifted. So previously, when like friends of mine had said, "Oh, I really don't think you're supposed to stay. I don't think this God's plan for you," I was like, "Well, the one piece of not taking full control of my own life, taking that away from God, the one piece I like haven't compromised on is staying here, doing the work He put me to." So that was like my one piece of faithfulness left. And I was like, "Oh, I can't go against that." But after 3 years, that summer, that lifted. So it's okay. I can look for other. It was COVID 2020, so yeah, there wasn't like huge amount of options. But yeah, I found out. Okay, I think I want to move to Oslo because I'd been part of. I caught glimpses of a church down there from friends of mine. I'm like, this might be, because I've been disillusioned with church communities, Bible school communities, Christian communities all over. There's like, there's some compromise. Oh, they're not really. Again, because if I really want to give myself to something, I need to rattle the foundations of it to make sure it's secure, that it's truthful, that it's good. I was like, okay, maybe this place is. So I looked, okay, I think I want to move to Oslo. Can't really do that right now, but I will come spring or next year, or yeah. But yeah, I stayed in Alta further. I couldn't bring myself to start up the youth ministry again that fall. That there just was so much. One of the only like consistent disciples or youngsters there, she had just moved. So it's just like, am I just doing this? I don't really see but so in my not starting, just out of weakness, really, I didn't, or, psychological opposition, whatever you want to call it. Someone else started. And so I got to be part of the team rather than just, I hadn't been alone until then. But I hadn't had someone co-leading, carrying the vision properly, I guess. Also, I didn't know how to do relationships. That's a separate story. But yeah, I remember come that Christmas or like December, I remember laying down on the carpet because there had been some sort of extra disappointment with God, some sort of like, this wasn't supposed to happen. Where I just knew this is deeper, it struck a deeper part of me that I kind of I will express. I remember I put a recording on because I'm like, something raw is coming out now. And I just cried, wept, sobbed as I just related to God that I am too weak to live how I think I ought to live. You can do something with that, please. If you're requiring a bare minimum of strength and discipline and ability in order for you to use us, I don't think I have it. And that's really, really sad. I so wish it were different, but yeah. And I just, wept. I would still get back up on the horse. I remember start of January, I had a sermon in my home church, the Sunday gathering, where I don't remember what I preached on. But
was that the grace mercy thing?
I have no idea.
I remember if you preached on that.
But I remember I played the recording.
Really?
Of me crying. I forget quite what the context was, but this is kind of my MO. It's okay, you need to press past what's uncomfortable, what's bad. Like you really need to model for the other weaker Christians, that you got to be raw, you got to be real, you got to really live your Christian life. It's got to be real. You can't just play at being Christian. You can't just, it's got to, and forget if it was immediately after that or like a week or two later, something else came up or something else happened or didn't happen or something where I just fully, God, I'm tired. I'm worn out. I've been fighting this fight of faith, like holding on, like, I know your word is true. I know it's gonna, in the face of so many disappointments and disillusionments and bitter, like, people who I really intimately walked with who departed the faith, really like, Mount Carmel sort of confrontations with Muslims or atheists and like, oh, God didn't come through powerfully as I expected him to. And this time, late January, I just, noticed I'd had enough. I just couldn't bring myself back up on the horse. Like, God, I'm tired. I'm worn out. I'm bitter. I'm resentful. I can't bring myself to do this anymore. You gotta bring me back. But I'm stopping to fight the fight of faith for an unknown amount of time. And I just kind of played video games, just gave in to my flesh. I stopped resisting porn and whatever entirely. I just kind of let myself go. To kind of childishly, spitefully, like, you don't deserve my, which, that's kind of where I wanted to end up. Like, that was the lowest, the most crisis of faith, where, like, I fully let go of my religiosity, of my outworkings of my faith, of my obedience, of my putting him as Lord, of my just fully, even in that season, it lasts for like 3-ish weeks, 3.5 maybe. I may have written it down somewhere. There were at least a couple moments I remember where I just became mindful of him, where either there was like a sense of his presence or his peace that just came in, and I just sat there and was present. Throughout all these weeks, I still can bring myself to disbelieve in him, like he's real. I couldn't.
Yep.
That
I
was
remember
just,
that was what you related.
I'd already done my homework in that sense.
Yep.
But I was just so bitter and upset that he didn't do to me as I would hope he did.
Mm-hmm.
But there were a few moments where just like I didn't seek him proactively at all during that time. I just fully, whenever a thought would, maybe I should, read some Bible or pray a little or go for a walk, into like, I just, no, I'm gonna choose the flesh. I'm gonna choose the worldly thing. I'm gonna like, but still there were those moments where he would like just enter in to my reality, and I would still hold on to bitterness. Because that's where I was at. I forget quite what like took me out, but it wasn't something drastic that like got me back on the horse again. But I kind of just fully kind of processed out that grief, bitterness, disillusionment, annoyance, whatever it was, where I could gradually start again.
Yep. And were you more relaxed about how you practiced your faith after that, or what did that season do in that regard?
I didn't really do much.
Okay.
That's it served as an exemplar of like uh the best I could do, during 4 years of this was where it ended up.
Mm.
Apart from the grace of God, this is where I'll end up. No matter how wise or skilled or intelligent or reflective, because I tried doing, I didn't just, read the Bible or pray, or I sought counsel. Could maybe this person be a spiritual parent to me? And I'm like, but probably in large part because of my, huge blind spot of not knowing how to really build relationships. I did still have people I confided in. I did still have Bible groups where we, cried together and called out to God together. But I didn't know how to relate to people, or I didn't allow myself to relate to people without any walls. Because I wanted to be the mature one, the giving one, the one who, because I knew that God valued that, Philippians 2, and, serve one another, encourage others. If you encourage others, bless others, God will take care of you. That was the, anyways. So that thing served as okay, this is how it goes if I don't have God's grace. So when I eventually fled Alta, half year after this weakest, darkest, emptiest moment of my life, I had a entirely different appreciation for when things did work than I had before. But I really did need to leave Alta because I just saw, okay, maybe God wanted to break down my confidence, myself, etc., to then, start anew. But I noticed, even as I lost more and more confidence, but I also had less faith, less hope, less, I just became apathetic, less and less alive, So left, started anew, got very quick confirmation that yes, this is where God wanted me to be through supernatural means, through prophetic words, and just how he encountered me in that very first gathering. I just kept ticking boxes of mine that this community is what I've dreamt about. And it still has flaws, but none of the essentials are missing. None of the essentials I've always looked for. And I had kind of lost faith at this point that real church, as the Bible describes it, existed. But it does. And it's not just in this church either. But
Okay.
Bible works.
Yeah. Okay, so your crisis of faith lasted quite long, 4 years of a dark season.
Sure.
And what kept you with your faith was partly that you'd already done the empirical, the rational explorations before that. And so even in your darkest moment, those 3 weeks, that was, I remember you talking about it like that. That was not really a doubt for you. It was more the conflicting evidence of your life with the promises in the Bible. Yeah. Okay, interesting. Well, I remember what we talked about your process, obviously, quite a lot during that season. I remember at a certain point,
Did we talk during those 3 weeks, or?
I think pretty quickly afterwards,
Right,
or maybe during, maybe not during.
No idea.
But I remember I felt part of that. But the whole 4-year dark season, what I at a certain point of my observation was, I think I told you, well, simple solution: get a good community, start school, get a girlfriend. Like, just do these practical, conservative, or traditional lifestyle things, and then these things will resolve.
Mhm.
Um, and do you think there's any validity to that perspective looking back? Because what you
Yeah.
usually want, because you can conceptualize this as a season of, like you said, like one of the perspectives you gave was, okay, you were just completely being broken down until the point where you realize, okay, I have no strength of my own.
Yeah.
So that's what God's gonna have to work with if He wants to work with me at all. So that's sort of a cool silver lining lesson to take away from a season like that. But it's a very particular conclusion that only has some use case, I would say, in specific contexts. Are there more silver linings or like lessons that you took away, or was it just sort of a
I mean,
dark
I
season?
do have a bunch of knowledge I gained there and experience. Like, I did still pastor youth for 3-4 years. I did still, practice leadership, and I mean, I did bless a bunch of people during this time. I did still. It's so, like, it's kind of similar to my teens, where I also had like my big struggle myself, me and God. But to other people, they could still see, okay, someone who's actively like going and staying encouraged and blessing others and really making a difference. But yeah, no, like, so yeah, I did still gain in knowledge. I did still kind of, grow in skills and whatever else. I don't know quite what a silver lining otherwise would be.
Yeah. Well, so maybe also beneath my question is, let's say that sometimes there's practical wisdom that can prevent, mistakes or dark seasons in your life. So do you think there could have been some practical wisdom that could have,
a huge thing. I mean, the main thing that I know now that I was missing there was community in the biblical sense. Like, sure, I had regular, met with Bible groups of and good Mormons. Friends. Huh?
And Mormons.
Yeah, so Mormons
that
too.
Messed you up.
No, I think that was, I mean, it was more time spent apart from just me. And I know that about myself, that me having a lot of free time and just being left to myself, that's usually when I spiral the worst. So those were good. I mean, talks with you as well aren't exactly directly faith building, but it's still. So yeah, I know now if I would do it again, I would demand community to do it with, rather than kind of hope, well, if it doesn't happen, me and God will kind of like. And through the teaching I've also received in Oslo, the church there, like, okay, the church to a significant degree is Jesus' body on the earth. And there might be special seasons where, like, God himself, or that's even wrong language, because God is himself working through the church. But, the direct divine, not through people line, will sustain you. But that is not the design he has made for the Christian life. The design he has made is that we'd be one body. We'd carry each other's burdens. We'd bless each other. We'd encourage each other. When we come together, everyone brings their piece. And if you lack pieces, there is part of Jesus you don't have in your life, which kind of radical, but that's a very clear thing that, 1 Corinthians 12 and Romans 12 talk about. It's yeah, that is it's there's an example in Acts where Paul comes to a place where like, oh, God had opened up a door for ministry there. But because I didn't find my brother Titus there, or I should know this, but he went on to a next place to find him. So like, well, but God opened a place, isn't that? But like, it's so significant to be with people that you kind of
Yeah. Well, maybe then I can jump in there a little bit with my own journey, because I was reflecting on this with you the other day. That looking back, I feel like a lot of my personal process away from the faith also had to do with, well, you come back from Bible school, this big Christian bubble, as people like to call it. I still don't like the term, but it's probably accurate. And then you come back here in, well, for me, the Netherlands, and then you lose all that identity and community.
Yeah.
And I think that was definitely a big part for me. Well, I said to you that it's probably easier to leave the faith if you don't have a Christian community.
Oh, obviously. Yeah.
Yeah. So, maybe we can explore. So I thought about
I think you can dive deeper into your crisis.
My crisis
to have
story?
it clear, so we can compare and
sure. So after, well, this is mostly it though. I think it was the philosophical considerations that I already sort of discussed earlier. I also had some theological changes of opinion that I already...
Universalism and...
Yeah, universalism,
preterism.
Which means everyone is saved, no one goes to hell.
Good job.
Yeah. Preterism, which means Jesus is not coming back in the future. That already occurred in 70 AD with the destruction of Jerusalem. Those were probably the most honest intellectual processes that I went through.
Okay.
Because the philosophical one of, God's motivations and us being thoughts of him, that was also sort of an interesting thought that did have actually a lot of influence on my path towards atheism. But it wasn't all intellectual or philosophical for me, because I noticed that I remember it was somewhere either the day off or around that day when I first called myself an atheist. It was here in my apartment. I was like, that sounds so weird. Atheist. No, I'm a Christian, I believe. And it was very weird to self-identify as an atheist. But I thought, well, no, in terms of if I'm honest with what I believe, I'm an atheist now.
Why do you think you held on to the Christian label?
It was really comfort, familiarity with the term, with the identity. Yeah. So I was probably Christian for longer than I actually was in terms of my beliefs, or called myself Christian for longer than that.
Longer than your actual.
Yeah. But around that day, or on the day itself, I thought, oh, but that means I have to evaluate the arguments for Christianity, to reevaluate them. Because I used to be very big into apologetics at Bible school, but even before that, at high school, I would be discussing like young Earth creationism. That was a thing for me. And then when I was 16, I graduated to like more sophisticated apologetics.
Good.
Arguments for God's existence and these sorts of things. And at Bible school, I used those a lot when we went out evangelizing. Like I remember, like I
discussion evangelism, great.
Yeah, well, some of the homeless people there really enjoyed it. Yeah, because they would throw up intellectual objections. Some of them,
right?
So and they enjoyed having a discussion partner.
I think I remember you said once that you didn't like the whole, you can't persuade someone into becoming a Christian.
Right, yeah.
That you like, well, no, you totally can.
Yeah, of course you can. Yeah. Yeah, I was a bit, younger then. So, but so then I became an atheist, but I hadn't seriously, I'd thought about it throughout my process towards atheism. Like, okay, these arguments, I remember I looked up one rebuttal of the ontological argument, and we talked about it because that was the one that you least liked.
Right.
And so, I knew some of the counters, but it was more looking back, that I used to always, in the debates that I watched of Christian versus atheist, I watched the Christian. I was like, yeah, how can anyone believe differently from this? And then I listened to like the first 10 minutes of the atheist part, and I was like, this is so stupid. I'm just gonna skip it. Go to the next
before
Christian
you, this was while you're still a Christian.
Yeah.
So I would skip ahead of the Christian part because I'm like, well, I know this stuff. I don't need to be more convinced into confirmation bias and stuff. I need to really wrestle with
This is a big difference between us for sure. But I noticed that when I was becoming an atheist, that I would skip the Christian parts and have the same feelings towards that I had towards the atheist part. And all of a sudden, I describe it as scales falling off my eyes towards the atheist arguments.
Right.
Like, all of a sudden, these start to make sense.
Yeah.
This is what I've written about much in my thesis and reflected on. Because this is how I've experienced my crisis more as a changing attunement unconsciously or subconsciously. So that, for example, atheistic arguments all of a sudden now become significant and relevant. So it's almost it almost felt involuntary, like you're getting carried in a river. And you're just getting carried along. You don't have that much of an influence over what's significant to you, what makes sense to you. But this is an interesting place where we can discuss some. But that's basically most of the journey. So it was it was definitely some intellectual and philosophical things, but it was also the losing the social community. Probably parts also just my natural tendency to want to explore ideas and boundaries of beliefs. And but it was and I think one other thing to mention here is that whereas, because I noticed this contrast between when you were just sharing and some of my story, that for you the intellectual side of it was sort of already explored. But the experiential side, that was the what you were trying to figure out. For me, the experience was always sort of quite intuitive, let's say.
How do you say?
In the sense that when I became an atheist, when I self-identified as an atheist, I was still talking to God, praying to God, doing all these things. And even in my atheist season, there were moments where I deliberately sort of reconnected to that experience.
Yeah. How do you answer the objection that a lot of people have that no, your actions betray what you believe, not what your cognitive, worldview, the worldview you espouse is what you believe. Like, no, if you talk to God, that means innately you believe he's there. How would you address that objection?
I'm thinking, I know how I would address it now. I'm just thinking how I would have addressed it then.
Right.
Let me see. I'm not sure that was something I considered.
I know I would have pressed that and probably did in our conversations.
Yeah. Well, I remember there was one time when an old friend of mine challenged me. He said, "Why don't you just, when you get home, kneel down, give your life to Jesus again, just surrender, leave behind all your rational arguments, and just surrender again, convert back." And what I said to him was that, well, I already know what's going to happen. I'm going to kneel down, give my life to Jesus. I'm going to have this amazing conversion experience.
Really?
Probably a strong sense of God's presence. And then that's going to last for 2 or 3 days. And then my mind's going to take over again. And all the rational argument. Because it did feel, in the moment, I was definitely saying, this is a philosophical, rational process. It felt like that. That was genuine. And the reason that I said that to this friend was because that had sort of happened already once or twice.
Okay.
3 times actually that I remember.
How would you? Okay, yeah. Because for me, whenever I would seek out God, I don't know how He's gonna respond. I know He's there. I know there's method to the madness from His perspective.
Well, do you think
I have no notion of whether or not He'll show up in power or like do something drastic, but I know what shifts in my heart as I do it. I know what like it aligns me. I'm like, okay, I rediscover myself. If I've been in a swirl and then I kind of repent, there is a centering that happens, but it's not necessarily drastic. Sometimes the drastic has come, there are varying degrees of expectancy. When I pray or worship and seek Him, I halfway expect and hope that will happen. Sometimes it does, sometimes it doesn't. But there's some cases, like I remember once up in Alta, I was at a university party. So, I was one to be involved where people were and talk to people there about Jesus and support my other Christian friends who out and, okay, we want to be present. We want to be, and I may have saved some guy's life as I was driving home and he was stumbling over, falling down into a ditch in the snow in -10. And I was like, I'm still what the heck would have happened if, hadn't driven past. I could because I didn't drink. Yeah. But in one of those cases, I remember having the manifestation of laughter, could have, in the church service. And it overwhelmed me. I just couldn't stop, and it weirded out my fellow students. And I was like, I didn't see a clear instrumental point to that manifestation then and there. But that's more my relationship with experiences of the divine. I'm curious to hear that you kind of have a certainty, which obviously feeds into my biased perception that your religiosity is more of a self-manifested, self-caused thing. I'm sorry,
Don't you think there can sometimes be circumstances when you know that if you do a certain thing that God is going to show up? So, for example, there was this, I think it was Steve Backlund reported some sort of joke that his student had come up with. He went to a group of people and then they said, we want to talk about Jesus. And someone said, I'm an atheist. And then the student said, great, God always shows up when there's an atheist. It sort of felt like that to me. I knew that because I was further removed from God, that sort of surrender from that place is more likely to initiate a response.
More likely is different, though.
Yeah, to me it felt like a certainty. But it was also because, well, it was experience-based. Like I said, there's 3 specific examples I could still bring up, which at least 2 of these. But one of them was just very simply when a friend of mine, he told me, in Chronicles, I think it says that the
eyes of God roam to and fro.
No. You're not gonna know the reference to this one, I'm certain.
Okay, fine.
The archers of Ephraim
turned back in the
day of battle because they lost sight of the testimony of the Lord.
Sure.
So a friend said that to me, hey, man, he was really direct, just confronting me. Dude, you've lost sight of everything that God has done in your life. And now that's why you're turning back on him. And I felt this really intense experience of conviction. Conviction? Yeah.
Sure.
And so I went home and I knelt down and I sort of reconverted. And then
when was this? During that first fall?
Yeah, during that first year back. And I had this big experience. I thought, okay, I'm back. And then 3 days later, the rational arguments started running again, and I couldn't keep it up. And then the other 2 experiences, the one was when I knelt down in a square, where I felt God asking me to do that, and that was a whole cool, like amazing experience in its own, with some different implications as well. But and there was another time when a friend from Bible school sort of said to me like, "Hey, after this conversation, why don't you just..." It's sort of what the guy said.
Yeah.
And basically the exact same. Like, put your intellectual objections aside and just connect to God again. And so I did that. I sat down in my chair, and I still see sort of the image that I had in my mind. It was like working through a jungle, pushing it all away. And then there was a moment of clarity when it's sort of all gone. Then whoosh, room was filled with the presence of God. And so, yeah, that was still a thing. So maybe that's why I had sort of the confidence in this. Yeah.
Cool. Those are our different
Those
crises.
They're very different, huh?
Yeah.
Why do you think that? What's your assessment of why I ended up where I ended up? And of course, there's more of a story after the atheist
sure.
season, but.
In that season, I think you required certainty. You required proof, which is a tricky thing. Like, I've discovered that someone asked me just a couple of weeks ago, like, okay, how sure are you that Christianity is true, that God is real? I'm like, well, I'm sure. Or I said, there's a long answer and a short answer. The short answer is yes, I know for sure. The long answer is, well, am I sure that my mom is my mom? I'm like, I could find sources of doubt. I could find reasons to doubt. I could focus in on those and, manufacture sources of unbelief in.
There's a rational pathway to atheism.
Yeah. No, but I'm saying with regards to my mom being my mom, I can find things undermining that belief. But like, no, my mom is my mom. That's like the obvious. So like philosophically, I've always, like I said, with different perspectives, I know the path I could walk to actively undermine, but I could undermine the atheist perspective in me as well, and the Mormon and the but the Christian worldview is the one that by far makes the most sense in my research of it. Obviously, I have my biases and that, but like, I'm
a
confident.
bit convenient still that you ended up in the denomination that you grew up in.
Oh, not at all.
Well, pretty much, right? Or at least the Bible schools that you did, it's a similar.
I think there are denominations that stick closer to what the Bible preaches. I think there are those who more, merge together with, for example, the Catholics merge tradition and like culture in a sense.
Even that you stayed within Protestantism, which is not at all obvious, of course.
Right. But so in my time of deconstruction in Alta, I was like, okay, what are the different ways this book can be read? What are the different ways these particular verses can be read? And obviously, to the best of my ability, tried to. But I also like listened to different denominational views, etc. And okay, which aligns more closely with the text? And in some ways, I deconstruct. I was like, well, how the heck does prayer work? What is faith? I went around for like a year and a half just asking people, when you prayed just now, did you pray with faith or did you just pray? Like, if you doubted, you're not supposed to get anything. When you and
freaking James, man, false prophet.
Luther agrees with you. But like I guess to an extent, I sticked with what I grew up with because I had sort of as an axiom, my life or the Christian life needs to look like what the Bible describes in order for it to be the Christian life. I just kind of flat out didn't buy dispensationalism because I didn't see the Bible really describe our dispensationalism, that like there are different parts of human history where God operates differently. and you can kind of build a case for it, but there is no, like, you'd expect there to be a very clear prescriptive description of like, yeah, this will cease. You have 1 Corinthians 13 where like, okay, these supernatural gifts will cease when, we fully see Christ, when like everything has been completed. But the narrative continuously is like, well, this is how it's supposed to go. We're supposed to preach the gospel, heal the sick, cleanse the lepers. Holy Spirit renews us. We become more and more mature. There's Ephesians 4 of like, until we all reach full maturity. There's not like this expectation that like, oh yeah, and then it will stop. And a Christian life will just be praying, kind of vaguely hoping God answers stuff, and kind of just trying to be nice, but really it won't look anything like Acts, like the life of Jesus. So I kind of had that as a sort of axiom. And due to my biblical, I was like, no, so if my life didn't have miracles, if it didn't have supernatural elements, I was like, well, then I could just be fooling myself. But didn't have specific, measurable, empirical examples that, I could assure myself from external things that, then I couldn't know if it was true anyways. So if I had ended up in a, more cessationist, then, well, how would I know that my cessationist views were correct? It's kind of, so I ended up in similar, but I also deconstructed a lot of what I thought and what my church growing up had taught, in the sense that, you can be a Christian, and you can be no, Christianity is the all-in life. Again, James 4 is like, well, if you try to do both, you try to live the worldly life and the Christ-surrendered life, it cannot work. And Jesus says the same thing. You can't serve two masters. So that was a fresh thing that I just found in the Bible. I'd heard people say similar stuff, but like the stark contrast between it's either or.
It's still okay to get a little bit of pushback. Still, is that
sure?
There are certain verses that were really important for you in this journey. For example, like with regard to the empirical evidence for your faith, it's the ask and you shall receive. And some of the other verses you mentioned, there's a kind of a constellation of verses surrounding your faith journey, where, because this is what I've noticed, is that there's other people who will say the exact same thing, like, okay, I've done the deconstruction, I've done the research and the intellectual exploration, I worked from this axiom. Maybe they don't say that.
Sure.
But it's the exact same narrative, but it's an entirely different constellation, different verses that they're referring to, different kind of conclusions that they're arriving at.
Right.
But the core is sort of the same. It's like, okay, Christianity is true. And so there's all these kind of different paradigms, the best way to describe it, in the sense that it's a whole system of ideas and verses, usually connected to the justification for Christianity. But it's always very different, of course, because you're dealing with different people. So to me, let's see how this pushback, at least how I see this, is that this is sort of the more core thing, is the paradigm that you develop.
Okay.
And the real connection to the foundational, final, absolute justification and certainty is sort of a more of a mask or a surface manifestation compared to sort of the conclusions that you reach, and that were, well, typically already in aligned with what you, well, grew up with
Okay.
for many people.
Can I try to rephrase what I think your objection to me is?
Yep.
That the process that led me to where I was more of a self-fulfilling thing based on who I was and what I would notice,
Right.
than necessarily
The noticing
that everyone would reach the same conclusion if they went the same journey as me.
Yeah,
So,
and they would notice different things, and they wouldn't notice the relevance or the significance of certain verses or arguments and how they're related to the justification of the truth of Christianity. All these are very subjective, particular attunements towards these things.
Mm-hmm.
Yes.
Right. Well, I mean, the simple and arrogant answer is I've seen a lot of people do their own research, and they're incredibly confirmation biased and just like kind of feed into their own. I've met very, very few people who, I would say hold humility or like self doubt as highly as I do.
No, fair enough. Although, we don't have to go into this.
No, sure.
But the thing that you did end up with as the primary justification for your faith is the miracles thing. And there I can see a lot of...
I think we haven't explored that really so far.
We did not in the podcast. Would you like to... Yeah, we can explore.
Well, it's just real quick that like, so when I was, really struggling, not seeing a lot of things happen up in Alta, praying for stuff, going after stuff, trying to apply some of the promises, didn't really see stuff happen. Okay, is Christianity true? Very natural. And yeah, very surprisingly robust answer for me was, well, I trust the testimony of some people who have cited similar miracles as in the Bible in contemporary times. I trust that these, sure, they could be embellishments, but not straight up lies. And even an embellished version of some of these stories are powerful. And, if you saw them, witness them, they'd be like, okay, there is no other way. We're talking dead raisings, we're talking suspensions of natural laws. And so, for me, that was honestly sufficient.
Yeah. And that I see as quite self-serving and a lack of critical, self-critical judgment.
Okay.
Because I had another friend, I have one particular friend in mind who sort of did a similar deconstruction thing to you, but what he landed on instead of miracles is prophecy. So he researched, for example, the prophecies in Daniel, the Bible book, and sort of the accuracy which he predicted the coming of Jesus.
Okay.
And there were some other biblical prophecies that he, because there's definitely interesting content there. But what I said simply to him, it's also sort of what is my simple objection to you, is that, well, yeah, prophecy can exist, miracles can exist, doesn't necessarily prove the truth of a particular worldview. And one objection that I particularly raised in more recent times against your position is that it could be the case that, because we can look, well, do miracles occur in other faiths or other wisdom practices or whatever? And of course, there are reports of that. But most reports come from Christianity. Well, to that I simply say, well, Jesus is the only religious teacher who ever made this an explicit part of the religious practice. Like his Great Commission was just practice miracles, practice miracles, practice miracles, practice miracles.
Preach the gospel.
And preach the gospel.
Lives changed, but yeah.
Yeah, but it's preach the gospel, make disciples of nations, raise the dead, cure the lepers, like make blind see. That's what I mean with the miracle. Yeah. So, he's the only religious teacher who ever did that. Buddha didn't do that. Muhammad didn't do that. I don't know if it's an explicit Hindu doctrine, but so that to me would just explain why you would, if miracle working is a thing, is a capability of humans, which I do believe in. Like, but I also frame it more in terms of there are some individuals with this gift, because that's what I observed at Bible school and beyond that, I suppose. And they are capable of doing these things. But that doesn't constrain
Validate
you
the
within
full belief system.
Doesn't validate the belief system and doesn't constrain you to that belief system. It could be some sort of human capability that we haven't explored to the full, and you would expect it in Christianity because, like I explained, it's encouraged there.
Well, you would also expect it in random people.
Yes, and I do think you see it in random people. Like Wim Hof is a good example of this. So he did the same thing that John G. Lake did, right? He went into the lab, did the same thing, where they put like toxics in him or something that was supposed to kill him, and it didn't.
But he cites purely physiological reasons for why that is.
Yes, he does the breathing exercises, and I don't know if he was particularly exercising those, because I think the thing with him is that he's now reached a sort of base level where he just has that sort of extreme health kind of thing going on. But yeah, and you would expect it another, and well, I would say like it would be interesting. Like, did you ever explore, for example, ancient Egypt? Because even in the Bible, we have reports of non-Christians. I mean, they're all non-Christians, but non-Jewish people also practicing miracles, like pharaohs. Priests were capable, just as Moses was, of turning their their staffs into snakes and turning rivers into blood. Or
I wonder if that miracle or one of the others that explicitly states they couldn't do the same one. But anyways,
at a certain point, the snake one.
Yeah, the snake one they could do. Moses' snake ate the other snakes.
Yes.
But at some point during this cascade of different,
they couldn't follow.
They couldn't replicate it. Yeah,
Moses outmoded them. But that's always what happens in every sort of hierarchy, right? There's one genius who outcompetes the rest. But yeah, we've had this discussions before.
Sure. I don't know quite where to.
Well, we can return to the crisis of faith thing, because you were answering, why do you think I ended up where I ended up?
Yeah.
I don't know if we sort of fully explored that yet. Or if you...
I said I think you required certainty. I think you required proof, in the terms that if you really applied the same systematicness to whether or not your mother was your mother, you would start to doubt that too. Potentially.
Yes, well, I became a complete nihilist at a certain point.
Yeah.
So, no, that's true. That was a big part of my crisis of faith, was just a complete doubt of any meaning.
Yeah.
So, yeah, no, fair enough. And then I did go the more philosophical route, and that would be maybe an interesting addendum here of the follow-up to the atheist thing, just shortly, that through my philosophy studies, then I discovered a stream of philosophy which emphasized subjective experience over absolute certainty and universal truth. And that because also my religious experiences, like I already explained, continued during my atheist phase, that sort of gave me a framework to, well, intellectually justify continued experience with a sort of disregard towards the intellectual side of things.
Right.
So
rationalism was no longer a fundamental framework for you.
Yeah.
You even kind of shunned it a bit.
Yeah. Yeah. I'm now sort of rediscovering the value of reason. But we still, there's still the issue of to what extent is your particular reason, like we already said, like grounded in your particular subjective attunements towards what kind of reasons would manifest themselves to you as relevant and salient, and
Cool.
Should we let's quickly check if the cameras are still going, just for my safety's sake. Okay, we're back. Maybe we can switch gears a little bit. Most of what we discussed so far are things that we've we've known about each other. We've discussed these things. We've been through this process, with each other.
Couple times.
But I mean, we were
systematized it better maybe than before.
Yeah, maybe. But I mean, I also meant that we were there to experience this journey, like mutually. So, but we were also talking earlier today. You brought up something from the Gospels that Jesus did, and I thought that was a very interesting place, maybe where we could also have a discussion.
Sure.
Could you relate that again?
What you?
So when Jesus, the cannibalism.
Yeah. In John 6, Jesus just fed 5,000 with 5 loaves and 2 fishes. It's a ridiculous miracle, and rightfully people want more. They want to see him and hear from him, and so they find him again in Capernaum, and he starts teaching them. And these are people who clearly believed. I think they're also described as believers. But he just says really weird stuff. He is like, you guys are children of Satan. You're not children of Abraham. If you did, you would have da-da-da-da-da. And then he's like, I'm the bread come down from heaven. My body is food indeed, and my blood is drink indeed. And people are like, well, how can he give us his body as food? This is weird. You can sort of oh, does it mean metaphorically? And so as to close off that interpretational ability, he's like, no, if you don't eat of my flesh and drink my blood, he's clearly steering them towards the belief that this guy's advocating cannibalism. He's just ramping up the offense of okay, what's how what's your buy-in here? And as expected, these people eventually this is a hard teaching. Yes, we saw awesomeness. Yes, we've heard awesomeness in what you've shared, but this, no. And so they leave. Then he turns around, so it's the end of the chapter, to the 12, to his, closest disciples who've walked with him for a while. And he's like, hey, are you guys going to leave too? And this is one of the most awesome moments in the Bible, the way I see it. One of the most tender, that speaks to me the most, because Peter just goes, where else can we go? Only you have the words of eternal life, which to me clearly communicates that, okay, they also are what the heck is Jesus talking about? This is clearly against, everything we've learned so far, everything, as we were kids, hearing about God through the Old Testament, and what is, this is wrong what we just heard. Yet the things they've received and heard and seen in Jesus were of such a different caliber to all the other, wisdoms and coolnesses and life givings that they'd encountered elsewhere in life. If it was in, teenage romance or this and that philosophical, they're like, okay, if you're not it, Jesus, then there isn't anything else. So even though this is ridiculously offensive, breaks all of our boxes of decency, and if it's not you, then game over. And that's sort of my conception of when you're living a Christian life, when you're really following God. He lets those moments happen. He kind of makes them happen, I think, because there's a big emphasis in the New Testament on having a pure faith, a perfected faith, a how gold is purified, a mature faith, a tested faith is of more worth than even that, pure gold.
Yeah.
And
be hot or cool, but not lukewarm.
Huh?
You can be hot or cool, but not lukewarm.
Yeah. Yeah. So when life throws you around, when really offensive, okay, this doesn't make sense. God, how could you let this happen? How could this, how could this messes with my comforts, my preferences? We're kind of put at a crossroads of, okay, will we stop trusting God as much as we have and take matters more into our own hands to like, okay, this makes more sense to me. This feels safer. This feels more predictable and in control. Or will we go even lower, surrender even our preferences, even our sense of how things ought to be in complete, like, okay, either God, you're the solution, or I'm completely tying myself to the mast here. Mm-hmm. Either the ship survives, or I won't really salvage much.
Yeah. Well, I thought this was very illuminating, this story, because one thing I realized, I wrote my philosophy thesis about basically the crisis of faith.
Right.
And the first version of the thesis was an argument for a particular outcome of a crisis of faith, namely deconversion.
Right.
So leaving the faith. And so the whole thesis built up to this giant climax in my mind, where the implicit goal, and I almost framed it as a sort of a divine calling that's inherent to the crisis of faith, is deconversion. It is that mood, that potency, that moment in your life where you have the opportunity to go in another direction.
Yeah.
But then I realized, then I got some feedback from my advisor. And we had a conversation about it. Those two things made me sort of reconsider this, because I thought, well, usually the idea of a crisis of faith is that what you're saying, you tie yourself to the mast, or you at least you persist, you come out with your faith intact. So like, I quote C.S. Lewis in now the revised version, who says, in Mere Christianity, faith is the art of holding on to things your reason once accepted, despite your changing moods. And that's
cool.
Yeah, and I think that's sort of the general consensus. It's like Job is another, for me, what I call the myth of the faith crisis, the crisis of faith. And he also persists, and he's sort of praised for that. And so, in that sense, I had a sort of unorthodox. I worked out a sort of unorthodox.
So
I am a bit unorthodox. Yeah, it's interesting how I sort of intuitively went that direction. But let's see. So so in that sense, let's see. Okay, so you shared the story about, and that's also the message of this story, right? That you shared about Jesus. Like these 12 disciples, they made the right decision in staying with Jesus. Now, my criticism of C.S. Lewis was that, well, precisely what I've sort of said, that what he says, faith is the art of holding on to things your reason once accepted, despite changing moods. But what he ignores in that is that, well, maybe changing moods are indicative that of the notion that you have to reevaluate your previously accepted reasons. And so I put a lot of weight on these changing subconscious attunements in this process. And I did experience my, let's see if that's true. I in the end, with everything summed up, also with my sort of return to religiosity in a way, I do feel that my deconversion process and my crisis of faith as a deepening of my religious understanding.
Mm-hmm.
And so the end result of my crisis of faith, to me, in a sense, looks similar to your end result, in that we both developed a deeper, personal, authentic understanding of what it means for us personally, and it looks different.
Except that your conception of what you're saying yes to is different than what it was, markedly so.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
There's a big, significant.
Yeah. And that's what that story that you shared also sort of highlighted for me. It was like, oh yeah, this is a big difference for us, because we were discussing how each of our individual relationships with God differs. That was sort of the starting point of that conversation. Yeah. And so when you shared that story about just the complete staying there even if you don't understand, I was like, oh yeah, okay, this is a big difference. This is a big difference between us. For me, I conceptualize my relationship with God as, like I said, like more of a friend who you see sometimes. You don't see them for 2 months. Sometimes you interact with them a lot.
Yeah.
And so he's not of that much of a primary central thing in my life. Whereas for you, you were explaining how everything for you gathers together.
Yeah.
In him.
Yeah.
And so this is definitely a big difference in our religious conceptions. Yeah, at the moment. Yeah. Would you like to add on to that?
Well, my thesis on your experience is that, you are interacting with your own creation of God, your own imagined manifestation of God, similar to how I could induce myself to having manifestation experiences that weren't 100% God or even 1% God. That I think one could induce the illusion of talking with God, of having experiences, of, coming up with prophetic words, which we've both had experiences with in Reading, for example. You try to come up with something that God is saying to another person. And for me, I was like, well, is that really? And you hope to gauge on the person's reaction whether, okay, this was genuinely something I received from God or something I came up with in my mind, because you expect that if it's really from God, then it'll touch and impact them. But then you kind of, after a while, realize that, well, it has a lot to do with the person in front of you, whether they're, they could be agreeable and just nice and like, oh yeah, no, or you could become an expert at communicating vague sort of horoscopy notions that still impact someone as it's significant. And again, I don't think this is like a scam where you essentially practice to like deceive someone. I think it's an intuitive process by which you learn subconsciously how to phrase things, that sort of gets past those defenses of reason. But yeah, so I my thesis of you, which I've been very clear about, is that that's sort of the process.
Yeah.
Whereas I, think that I at least have some authentic experiences with God. I'm under no illusions that all of my experiences are perfectly 100% God. But yeah.
Yeah, it's interesting. I still feel that the phenomenology of those couple
are identical. Yeah.
Yeah, those couple experiences that for example, the one where I kneeled in the square, or these couple of experiences, or on the lake. I won't relate these stories now, but that those were phenomenologically just
exactly similar and of the same caliber that I would cite as some of.
But still, there's also a part of me, although I don't do I try not to do origin explanations. Still, there's
it's frustrating for us positivists.
Yes. But still, like part of me actually agrees with your analysis of my God experiences. In the sense that I have experienced it, and this also I sort of worked this out in my thesis as well. That it is a act of co-creation,
right?
Religious experiences, and I took the word presence for that, which William James in the Varieties of Religious Experiences, where he elaborates on a variety of religious experiences. The word divine presence is like 100 appears like 100 times. It's very core. He also pinpoints it as a core experience in the religious experience.
Yeah.
And so I looked at the etymology of presence, and what it's of course it's
present and
pre and sense.
Okay.
So it comes from Latin praesentia. I've never explained this to you.
Might not.
Okay. Well, it's interesting. So it comes from the Latin pre and sentia, and so pre in the older Latin was mostly spatially before you, in your in objective surroundings, natural surroundings, and then sensia had both the sensory experience as well as sense making.
Okay.
So then I looked at presence in English, and I made the observation that sense is still sort of the same thing. It's this sensory experience and sense making, cognitive identification. And pre is now not just a spatial thing, but also temporal, because you're premature, which means you're not yet mature, and all these other words with pre in front of them. So what does presence mean then? It's this sense that we all have. It's it's something which appears before you, before it has been sensorially, empirically experienced or cognitively identified.
So isn't this just what we accuse Chris Valentin of doing, though? Of like, I think it's called the etymological fallacy. That a lot of Christians are, because pharmakeia in the Greek was like related to witchcraft, therefore pharmaceutical industry is demonic. Like I don't like it's an interesting thought, and maybe it could open up some new avenues of thought. But
that's the idea. I don't mean to say anything sort of objective with this, or this is how it's supposed to.
Yeah, sorry.
What this necessarily indicates, this word.
Right.
No, this has just really helped me in describing my own spiritual experiences.
Okay.
This presence thing is like, oh yeah, of course, that is how I experienced it. So religious experience or spiritual experience for me is, first what happens is you notice presence, which is you don't know what it is. You just notice, something is happening. You also mentioned this earlier. And then what tends to happen is that once you notice, then there's either an instinctive cognition associated with it, so you recognize what the presence is, or you work it out. Sometimes you have to work it out, or sometimes you even don't know. You just notice there's a presence. And so there is in the cases where there's not an immediate recognition, there is a sort of co-creation happening in the spiritual experience. So
what about the case where that's not?
In the case where that's not, so I'm thinking of one in particular, and this is also very often the case with God's presence. That's that's often to me immediately identified as this is God to me particularly. But there was another one where I'm just gonna say this on podcast. Who cares? But where my grandmother had just passed away, and then I was on my bike to the place I used to live. I wasn't thinking of her in particular, thinking. And all of a sudden I felt a presence, and then I saw basically in front of me my grandma. It's like, oh, it's my grandma.
When you say saw, you mean?
Well, that's my explication of what a vision is. Okay. So a vision for me, considered shortly, is I compare it to a daydream. So when you're daydreaming, the physical world goes to the background,
Mhm.
and you're in this state where you're daydreaming. It's like a dream. Like
Yeah.
you're not there in the physical world, and then you wake up. If your attention gets called, you sort of wake up from the daydream, and then you're again, the physical world is present again.
Mhm.
A vision is like that. The physical world goes to the background,
Mhm.
but you're conscious. Whereas in a daydream, you're sort of on the background as well.
Yeah.
In a vision, you're fully there, but the physical world is on the background. You're seeing another image as though it is in front of you. It's not physically in front of you like a table.
And it's not like an apparition you see superimposed on. You're seeing a different canvas than what's. Yeah. You're in the canvas of your mind.
Yeah, basically. But it appears in the external world. And so that's what I mean.
That's where you lose me.
It doesn't appear in the external world as a table with. Yeah, but you have your eyes open and you're looking at something. And you're looking in your minds, you could say. But I saw her basically float in front of me like this. Okay. So, and also some other experiences I've had, like visitations of angels, where they were standing in front of me, and it was as though like I knew I could point to the ground on which they were standing. So, that's how. Forget what the route was to this part of the conversation. The religion, the spiritual experience.
I'm sorry.
Okay. Yeah, no, it's fine. Well, we talked about how you think of. Oh yeah, that was the connection. So how you thought of my spiritual experiences as self-fabricated, and I would say So in there's definitely some cases where that's the case. Well, and what this is maybe more salient that was that when I was an atheist, and I had an experience like that, because I was also then not necessarily a naturalist, I would ascribe the contents of the experience to my physiology. So I would say, it's just my brain producing chemicals or brain states. But what would happen, this was the strange thing, was that the experience would stop.
Yeah.
So that's what I mean with the co-creation thing as well. Like, maybe it's not so much that
you got to suspend your disbelief.
You have to suspend your disbelief. That's probably a good way of saying it. Yeah. Once you start to doubt, the experience stops. So in that sense, you have a creative power in relationship to the experience. And so I just sort of stopped doing that, and then the philosophical, phenomenology helped me to sort of just find an intellectual grounding for that. But so that's a better illustration of the co-creative.
Just to pull us all the way back, to me, I believed that I was a necessary part for these things to happen. Like, I need to agree with that would exclude me from the possibility that this was a true external being interacting with me. Well, I agree with the doubt thing, that you can sort of increase or decrease its potency. But if you can eliminate it altogether, that's where I'm like, okay, that seems like, for me, who's still like looking for origins and whether or not these things actually metaphysically, exist, that would, defeat it for me. That would defeat my belief that it was.
Yeah, but couldn't those just be the rules of conduct for the spiritual realm? So that they, because
but James, then how would it start?
Or Hebrews says that those who would come to God
must believe that He is, and that He's diligently seek Him. Yeah.
So that's the verse I usually refer to with this.
Yeah.
But what was that question that you asked?
So like, how would it start?
This experience?
Yeah.
Just happens.
Yeah, but like, you how would if you didn't fully believe in the first place, how can these experiences start happening?
No, that's a great question, because that's usually the next question I get from people who don't have these types of experience or don't have religious background. And then, well, what I asked, and I've asked this question to so many people over the past like two or so years, is well, have you ever had some sort of religious experience? Could even just be a dream. that had some like meaningful content to it. But also just like maybe at some point something happened in your life and that sort of initiated some sort of experience like this. And usually most people always have like one or two these types of experiences. So I just refer them back to that and say, well, like what happened then? And then usually people so far have tended to relate to the presence explanation.
But don't you see that this would more align with my view that there is something external actually doing something, actually impressing upon you a sense, rather than you being a necessary component of creating it? That you can like say, God gives you a couple freebies, but then
freebies.
Yeah, freebies. Like taste tests.
Yeah.
Okay, supermarket.
Like that.
But like if you just know I want to stay in my own back off, like I don't, then he'll respect that until you have a longing yourself, and then he'll, I mean, but then there are others who, reject God again.
They keep getting,
and he still hunts them down. Those testimonies go
like Alex O'Connor.
It's true.
Who diligently seek, mostly intellectually, but still.
Yeah.
I still think it's sort of dishonest, to be honest, the Alex O'Connor phenomenon. I see it happen with more people.
What do you mean?
Well, saying, okay, I studied theology, I went to church, I did all these things, and still nothing. It's kind of in the Hitchian rhetorical mode. So, but to me, it's still sort of you have to believe it.
You have a pride that like, no, I won't step outside of that's your objection to Alex, that he has a level of, no, I won't compromise on
I
think, sense of reason.
I think he doesn't understand the right pathway to take, like just genuinely.
Right.
Because I see this with more people, because it's very simple. Yes. Okay. So you go to church, you try to pray, you read the Bible, you integrate yourself in a community, and then you actually believe it. So you actually start saying to yourself, I believe that God exists. I am a Christian. Jesus, you start adopting all these theological.
Why would you though?
Well, if you really want to try it out, I'm saying if you really want to be a Christian and have this experience, this is what you do. Like you just literally become a Christian. And then you'll see that your whole sense-making apparatus will be oriented towards it.
But what you believe and what you like,
you can form it. Well, do you
think I can convince myself of, I don't know, COVID vaccines change your genes? Do you think I can just repeat that to myself enough and it'll...
I think in the religious realm, there's more of a closed, like a closed system that's sufficiently closed. So I personally think that, and Alex O'Connor actually espouses this in a way.
Okay.
He says the arguments for atheism aren't in any sense like
more persuasive.
Yeah, necessarily persuasive. And there are also a lot of good arguments for Christianity. So he's already sort of on this boundary. And with COVID vaccinations, is of course much more of a muddy discussion. Religion is already a lot more sorted out in that sense. And so
really, I would put it opposite, but
yeah, okay. Well, I didn't.
Well, in the sense that you can, like, it's more tangible. It's more easier to do empirical analysis of it, whereas religious ideas, you way too quickly come up against just vague notions of, well, I feel like and I know. But
that's what Alex says that he wanted, right? He wanted to feel something. He wanted a God experience. Yeah. So I'm saying, well, if you want that, you have to go the faith direction. And like the paradigm is not going to be, the intellectual paradigm is not going to be, doesn't need to present such an issue as it would in like more political discussions, because the Christian paradigm is closed, and they're like within that paradigm, everything holds together. That's my view of it. And there are plenty of good arguments if you're intellectually inclined for it as well. So Yeah.
Well, the rabbit trail.
Yeah, that was quite the rabbit trail. What did we call? Oh yeah, so the spiritual experience itself in both.
Yeah.
Oh yeah, and then the how other people could do this, and then but you asked something after that. I don't know if you recall.
No, I don't. But like the general thing is, I feel it has to be an external entity that is imposing itself on my experience. That if it's just something I create, or it's incumbent on me to be part of creating it, then I'm like, well, then it might as well be a figment of my imagination.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, I think part of me is also fine with it. Is at least practically how I relate to these things, as though they're external entities.
Right.
But like I've always been saying, is I'm indifferent to the metaphysics, and there's reasons for that. It's not just indifference because I'm lazy,
right?
But it's because, well, once for example, the encounter with my grandma. From a Christian perspective, I would assume, and I've already heard from one Christian person who I shared this with, that, well, source, so source likely to be demonic. It's not biblical. So in the Christian perspective, you have good source, bad source.
Yeah.
And what starts to happen then is that, well, good, bad, these become absolute and certain terms, and we discussed what we think are the pitfalls of absolutism: judgment, exclusion, fear, also of these experiences, right? Because now all of a sudden, oh God, I've been visited by a demon. This is bad.
But also you can suddenly distinguish between better and worse, and you can actually approach the truth, approach the good, rather than be in the uncertain, swimming around in an open ocean, not knowing where to go, which I think is where
that's the positive of discrimination, for sure.
Yeah.
Just that, then I from my current experiences, and the Christian perspective on this wouldn't be where I would see myself end up, because for example, the experience with my grandmother or with other entities that aren't like positive entities in Christianity, I experienced as extremely meaningful and positive. So that would make it more difficult for me to be aligned with the Christian interpretation of it. I would see myself but where I end up in a sort of a Jungian thing, which you say isn't practical, it's just intellectual, blah blah. But for me, it's very relevant. Is that, well, apparently religious experiences are universal. They occur across cultures, across myths, and so there are many mythologies where ancestor visitations are a thing. And where demonic visitations are just as valuable as angelic visitations or visitations of the divine. And so that's where I see these kind of experiences pointing to the truth of that kind of framework more seriously. All right. Well, we ended up here, I guess.
Any closing thoughts on the similarities and differences? Or
do you want to take the lead on that?
Well, I think we have different goals fundamentally, and I think this has been, or I am curious to what extent you think this might have been a lifelong difference between us. Because it seemed when we started out that we both were in pursuit of the truest truth, the truest conceptualization of reality, etc., which now is no longer, you're more of a, well, at least I would call you more of a pragmatist. Okay, what is functional? What is good? What is effective? Rather than, is it true? Is it, metaphysically? Yeah, it's like, no, we don't need necessarily for the worldview to be a smell of science, smell of like, it's
absolute certainty smells bad to me.
Right. Whereas that is still my goal. I don't want to be mistaken. And for you, it's more about the results of what you believe, whether they are
I think everyone ends up. I think there is some sort of absolutism to my perspective. It's not entirely just pragmatic anymore. And that would be that I think hero's journey. I love this. But everyone is on their own hero's journey. That God adapts himself to the person. That the expression of that will differ depending on the individual and the context that they're in.
Yeah.
And so your Christian, like I am nowadays in full, as far as I can manage, and sometimes I forget this, of course, but generally this has been my stance. I fully support your Christianity.
My Christianity,
because it's your Christianity. You have authentically discovered this. And like, so for you to go another direction would be just not productive, and not that it matters to be productive, but you know what I mean? Like, this is your calling. This is what your life is about. And you're going to do great things from within that paradigm.
But if I decided that I have a different calling, you'd pivot, and to the extent that you were convinced that this was an authentic expression of myself.
Because I do think callings can change, and life is flexible, and God is flexible as well.
Right.
I think. But yeah, to encourage a person on their particular path, wherever that might lead them. So I'm less concerned with the destination. I think the path, the journey is the end goal. Sort of like this. That's now, I guess, where I've ended up. So, and that is sort of an absolutist claim. Like it's sort of a relativist claim, but also not really, because it's really grounded in the experience of individuals. And there is a universal pattern to this. So, but yeah.
Cool.
Yeah. So difference in goals.
Yeah. That kind of, might be a summary of sorts.
Although is the search for certainty and absolute truth still, because I've also heard you these past few days talking very much in pragmatic terms.
Yeah. I shortly bounced by there that I agree with you in the sense that the Ding an sich, the thing in itself, the best thing we can do is be mindful of our biases, mindful of our glasses, and kind of take that into consideration in our scientific model or our conceptualization of how things really are. That, okay, there is the possibility of error in just confirmation bias, etc. So I am always open to, I might be wrong, but at the same time, I'm confident about my current conception of things. And I'd be incredibly shocked if I ever made major changes to my perception of things, because it seems to consistently hold water with the experiences I have. And with the amount of people who have their lives changed as they adopt it. I think the kingdom of God and biblical perception of reality is accurate. It's a right understanding of life and living in the world we're in.
I agree.
Yeah, but my understanding of the biblical explanation can change, as your understanding of anything can. Yeah.
Well, I think I agreed with everything that you just said. So
lovely.
Which is a nice controversial.
Want to finish with a prayer?
We can. Do you want to? Hey, you can end us off in prayer. That'd be great, actually.
Oh, thank you, Lord. That you reveal yourself to those who seek you. That you're good. That you're kind to even the ungrateful and the evil ones, that you are true and faithful and loving, no matter how we as people relate to you, respond to you, and that you're always ready to receive those who want to live your way, accept you above their own lacking imperfect judgment. I pray that for everyone witnessing this podcast, and for me and David, that you would, lead us to you, and help us stay there if we're on the right track. Amen.
Amen.